As the door slid open onto the exclusive level, she took a breath, straightened her uniform, and approached the suite door with the same professional composure she brought to every shift. When she knocked and entered, the man standing by the window turned to face her, and for a moment neither of them moved. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the kind of authority that came from inheriting empires. His eyes were dark and weary, carrying stories she couldn't yet read. He was, without question, the most striking man she had ever seen up close. "Good morning," she said in English, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "How may I assist you?" He studied her for a moment, and then he spoke, a rapid stream of Arabic, his words precise and tinged with frustration. He was asking for tea prepared a specific way, honey from a particular region, and details about the hotel's amenities that seemed oddly specific, almost desperate in their precision. Without hesitation, Sarah responded in Arabic, her mother's dialect flowing from her lips like water finding its natural course. "I understand perfectly," she said, her words matching his regional inflection. "What you're requesting is very specific. I will prepare everything exactly as you need it. You don't need to repeat yourself." The transformation on his face was instantaneous. His shoulders relaxed, his expression shifted from frustration to something resembling gratitude, and for the first time she saw beneath the armor of his wealth and power to the human being underneath. "You speak Arabic," he said almost wonderingly in English now. "I do," she confirmed. "My mother was Lebanese. It's a long story." "I have time," he said, and something in his tone suggested he meant it, not as a polite pleasantry, but as a genuine invitation. "Please, if you don't mind, sit for a moment." This was completely against hotel protocol. Sarah should have declined politely and retreated to fetch his tea. Instead, she found herself lowering onto the edge of a chair, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing with the impropriety of the moment and the inexplicable rightness of it. "My name is Khalid al-Rashid," he said, extending his hand across the vast distance between them. She placed her hand in his, noting the warmth, the strength, the gentleness in his grip. "Sarah Mitchell, and I promise you, your tea will be perfect." That handshake lasted a fraction longer than necessary. Neither of them was thinking about tea anymore. Over the next week, Khalid requested Sarah specifically. It became the running joke among the other staff members, though their amusement masked a growing curiosity about what was happening in the penthouse. Sarah told herself she was simply being professional, ensuring a valued guest received excellent service, but she knew in the quiet hours before sleep that it was far more than that. They talked about everything. Khalid would request tea or coffee or meals, and Sarah would bring them, but she would also stay, sometimes for just a few minutes, sometimes for longer conversations that stretched the boundaries of propriety. He asked about her life, her dreams, the small details that no one in this hotel had ever bothered to notice about her. In return, she asked about his world, his business, his family, and slowly, the careful walls he maintained began to crack. "My father expects me to marry within our community," he told her one evening, as she arranged fresh flowers in a vase. "A woman he has selected, whose family's business would complement our interests. It's a practical arrangement. Efficient." "But you don't want that," Sarah said, understanding more from his tone than his words. "I don't want practical," he admitted. "I've lived a practical life for 34 years. I have built empires on practicality. I have made decisions based on logic and benefit, and I have never felt less like myself." Sarah's hands stilled on the stem she was arranging. "What would you want instead?" He turned to face her fully, and in his eyes was a vulnerability that made her chest ache. "I don't know. Something real, someone real. A woman who sees me, not my title or my wealth, but the person underneath. Someone who speaks my language, literally and figuratively. The weight of his gaze felt like it could consume her. Sarah set down the flowers carefully and forced herself to maintain her professional demeanor, even as every instinct screamed at her to close the distance between them. "I should bring you dinner," she said softly, turning toward the door. "Sarah, wait." He stepped forward, and her breath caught. "I know this is inappropriate. I know the rules. But I would very much like to have dinner with you, not as a guest and employee, as two people who have found something unexpected in each other's company." "That's not possible," she whispered, though she wanted nothing more than to say yes. "Why not?" "Because I need this job. Because you leave in 5 days, and you'll return to your life and I'll return to mine. Because wanting something doesn't make it wise." "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the wisest thing is to want something desperately and pursue it anyway." Against every rule she had ever followed, against every instinct of self-preservation, Sarah said, "Ask me again when your stay is ending. Maybe by then I'll have a different answer." The days that followed were electric with anticipation. They were always conscious of boundaries, always aware of the risks, but the connection between them deepened with every conversation. Khalid shared his struggles with his family business, the pressure to maintain tradition while modernizing his company's approach. Sarah shared her dreams of opening a small bookstore, of writing, of creating something that was authentically hers. They spoke in Arabic and English, sometimes switching between languages in the middle of a sentence, finding in that linguistic dance a metaphor for their relationship, neither fully one thing nor another, but beautifully both. On his 4th evening in the hotel, Khalid made an unexpected move. "Come with me tonight, not as my employee, as my guest. There's an exhibition opening at the Modern Art Museum. I want you to see it with me." "I can't leave work early," Sarah said, but she was already thinking about how she could. "Yes, you can. I'll speak to your manager. I'll frame it as a special request, something required for your employment at the hotel. It's not entirely dishonest." Sarah found herself agreeing, and at 7 o'clock that evening she left the hotel in a simple black dress that was the nicest thing she owned and stepped into a limousine with Khalid. As the city passed by outside the darkened windows, she felt like she was entering a different world, one where the rules didn't apply, where a billionaire Arab prince and an American waitress could exist in the same space without contradiction. The exhibition was stunning, and they moved through it slowly, discussing the art, the artist's intentions, and what each piece meant to them. But Sarah knew they weren't really seeing the paintings. They were seeing each other, reflected and magnified in every shadow and light. When they returned to the hotel late that night, Khalid walked her to her apartment building, a modest place 3 blocks away. At the door, he reached for her hand. "I leave in 1 day," he said. "I want you to come with me to Dubai. Spend time with me there. See my world." "That's impossible," she breathed. "I have a life here. I have a job." "You have a job that doesn't fulfill you. Come with me, just for a month. We'll figure out the rest after." Sarah's heart was screaming yes, but her mind knew better. "I'll think about it," she promised. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, and made a decision that would alter the course of her life. By morning, Sarah had arranged a temporary leave of absence from the hotel and packed a single suitcase with essentials. Her supervisor, thrilled by Khalid's personal request that she be allowed to leave, offered no resistance. The other waitresses whispered their theories, that she was having an affair with the guest, that she was foolish, that this would end badly. Sarah heard them, but didn't defend herself. Some decisions existed beyond explanation. The flight to Dubai was a revelation. Khalid had arranged for her to travel business class, and Sarah had never felt more out of place or more cherished. She sat in the luxurious cabin, sipping champagne she didn't particularly like, watching the clouds part below them, and tried to reconcile the impossibility of her situation with the undeniable reality of it. When they arrived in Dubai, Khalid's world unfolded before her like a geographic manifestation of his wealth and power. His penthouse apartment overlooked the Arabian Gulf, with interiors decorated by renowned designers and filled with art that probably cost more than her entire existence. But what struck Sarah most wasn't the opulence. It was how Khalid moved through it all, with an air of someone who had grown tired of impressive things. "This is where I live," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "I know it's a lot. It's beautiful," she said honestly. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of waking up from this dream, of discovering that this isn't real, of finding out that you have a fiancé waiting for you, or that I'm some sort of elaborate escape fantasy." Khalid took her hands in his. "I need to tell you something. My family is expecting me to announce an engagement next month to Layla Al Maktoum. It's a merger disguised as a marriage. Her father's import business aligns with our expansion plans. I came to New York to clear my head, to escape the inevitable. And then you appeared, and everything changed." Sarah's stomach twisted. "So what does this mean? What am I, exactly?" "You're the woman I choose," he said simply. "I don't know how yet. I don't know if it's possible. But I'm going to find a way." Over the following weeks, Sarah lived a double life. During the day, she explored Dubai with Khalid, discovering hidden gardens in the old city, eating street food in the souks, swimming in the Arabian Gulf at sunset. They attended art galleries and private concerts. They talked for hours about his vision for his business, how he wanted to shift it away from purely profit-driven decisions toward sustainable practices that honored tradition while embracing progress. Sarah shared her dreams of opening a bookstore that would serve as a community space, a refuge for readers and writers. But there were also difficult moments. Khalid received calls from his father, his tone always deferent, but his eyes always clouded. His mother visited the penthouse unannounced once, and Sarah hid in the bedroom, feeling like a shameful secret. There were business dinners where Khalid introduced her as a friend from America, and she caught the knowing looks from his colleagues, the assessment in their eyes, the judgment barely concealed. One night, after a particularly tense phone call with his father, Khalid pulled Sarah close on the balcony, overlooking the glittering city. "I've made a decision," he said. "I'm calling off the engagement with Layla. I don't care about the business implications. I don't care about my father's disappointment. I can't marry someone I don't love when I'm in love with you." Sarah's breath caught. "You're in love with me?" "I have been since the moment you walked into that penthouse suite and spoke to me in Arabic like you were speaking directly to my soul," he said. "Sarah Mitchell, I am asking you to marry me. I'm asking you to build a life with me, to take every risk, to leap across every boundary with me." But before she could answer, his phone rang. His expression shifted as he listened, and she watched the color drain from his face. "My father has had a heart attack," he said quietly. "I need to go to his estate immediately, in the desert, away from the city." Sarah's joy suspended in time, unspoken, as she watched Khalid transform back into the dutiful son, the corporate heir, the man bound by obligation. She held the words of her own confession, that she loved him, that she wanted to marry him, that she was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, locked inside herself, waiting for a moment that might never come. The estate in the desert was a fortress of marble and tradition. Khalid's father, Sheikh Rashid al-Rashid, lay in the main residence, recovering from his cardiac event under the care of private physicians. The family gathered, aunts, uncles, cousins, and representatives from business interests across 3 continents. Sarah was relegated to a guest house, maintaining the pretense of being simply a visiting friend, while Khalid navigated the complex web of family politics and business concerns. It was during this separation, with Sarah spending long, lonely hours in the guest house, that she discovered something that would shatter the fragile foundation they had built. She had borrowed one of Khalid's tablets to research local restaurants for dinner, and when she opened the browser, she found herself looking at a series of messages in the search history, photos and articles about herself, along with a series of emails from someone named Marcus Davidson. Against her better judgment, she clicked on the email thread and began to read. What unfolded was a stunning betrayal. Marcus Davidson was a business rival of Khalid's, someone who had lost a major contract to Khalid's company 5 years ago. According to the email chain, Davidson had hired a private investigator to gather information on Khalid, anything that could be used against him. Khalid's relationship with Sarah had been discovered, and Davidson was planning to use it as leverage, claiming that Khalid had become emotionally compromised and was making poor business decisions. But the emails went further. There was communication between Davidson and someone else in Khalid's organization, someone with access to internal company information. Together, they were orchestrating a hostile takeover attempt, capitalizing on the current chaos of Khalid's father's health crisis. And they were planning to expose Khalid's relationship with Sarah as part of their campaign to discredit him, framing him as irresponsible and unsuitable to lead the company. Sarah's hands trembled as she read. She felt sick, violated, and utterly lost. Had Khalid known about this threat? Had he kept it from her? Or was he also being manipulated, unaware that his enemies were closing in? When Khalid came to her that evening, his face was lined with exhaustion and stress. She couldn't immediately tell him what she had discovered. Instead, she asked him point blank, "Are you in legal trouble? Is there something you're not telling me?" His response was evasive, which told her everything she needed to know. "There are always business complications. Nothing for you to worry about." "I found emails on your tablet," she said, her voice shaking, "from Marcus Davidson. About me. About us." Khalid's face went pale. He sat down heavily, and for a long moment he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I received those emails 3 weeks ago, before you came to Dubai. I was investigating who sent them, trying to figure out how to protect you and us. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to frighten you away. I didn't want you to feel like you were part of a scandal. So you lied to me instead," Sarah said. "You made decisions about what I needed to know without giving me the choice to decide for myself. I was trying to protect you." "That's not protection," she said. "That's control. That's deciding that your version of the truth is more important than my right to face reality." The words hung between them, and Sarah saw his face darken with a pain that went beyond their argument. It was the pain of someone who had just realized that the thing he loved most was slipping away from him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked desperately. "I want you to be honest with me. I want you to trust me with the truth, even when it's complicated and frightening. And I want you to tell me, is there any chance that this relationship is viable, or are we just a beautiful moment that's about to be destroyed by the gravity of your real life?" Khalid reached for her, but she stepped back. "I need time," she said. "I need to think. I need to understand what's real and what's been part of some sort of fantasy." That night, Sarah lay awake in the guest house, listening to the desert wind, and made one of the hardest decisions of her life. She couldn't stay in this limbo, caught between worlds, never fully belonging to either. She wrote Khalid a letter explaining that she was leaving, returning to New York, returning to her job and her small apartment and the life she understood. She told him that she loved him, but that love might not be enough to bridge the gap between them. In the morning, she arranged a car to take her to the airport, and she left the letter on the pillow of her bed. Back in New York, Sarah felt like a ghost moving through her familiar spaces. The hotel welcomed her back with little fanfare, and she returned to her shifts with mechanical precision. The other waitresses noticed immediately that something fundamental had changed. The light that had briefly illuminated her seemed extinguished, replaced by a careful distance and professional coldness. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks in which Sarah told herself she had made the right choice, that she had protected herself from inevitable heartbreak, that she was healing. But the truth was more complicated. She missed him with a physical ache that made it hard to breathe. She found herself checking news sites obsessively for information about his company, about him, about any sign that his life was continuing without her. It was a news article that first broke through her carefully maintained walls. A headline announced that the hostile takeover attempt against Khalid's company had failed, and that Khalid himself had orchestrated a brilliant counter-move. Using information he had gathered about Marcus Davidson's illegal financial practices, Khalid had turned the tables, forcing Davidson to withdraw his bid and threatening legal action. The article portrayed Khalid as a ruthless businessman who had crushed his opponent without mercy. But there was more. His engagement to Layla Al Maktoum had been officially announced. Sarah felt like someone had reached into her chest and torn her heart from her body. She told herself it was inevitable, that she had known this would happen, that she had no right to feel betrayed. But the knowledge didn't ease the pain. It was only later, reading the article more carefully, that she noticed something odd. The wedding was announced as a business merger alliance, set for 4 months away. There was no mention of love, no romantic quotes, no suggestion that either party was thrilled about the union. In fact, the article noted that Layla had seemed noticeably unhappy at the announcement event. And then Sarah received a package. Inside was a book, a first edition of Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a book she had mentioned to Khalid months ago as her favorite novel. With it was a handwritten letter, written in Arabic, in Khalid's careful script. My Sarah, I understand why you left. I understand your anger, your fear, your need to protect yourself. I failed you when I didn't trust you with the truth, and I accept the weight of that failure. But I want you to know the complete truth now. The engagement to Layla is a business arrangement that I agreed to before I met you. I told my father that I would honor the commitment, but only if he would permit me 6 months to find another solution. He agreed, perhaps because he knows that I would rather disappoint him than live a life of lies. That 6-month window expires in 4 months. When it does, I am breaking the engagement, regardless of the business consequences or my father's reaction. I am choosing love over duty, and I am choosing you. I have continued to think of you every moment since you left. I dream of that bookstore you described, the one with comfortable chairs and tea and people gathering to share stories. I dream of building that with you. I dream of a life where we don't hide, where we don't pretend, where we are simply 2 people who chose each other across all boundaries. I will wait for you. I will be patient. But I needed you to know that I haven't forgotten, I haven't moved on, and I never will. In Arabic, we have a word, ishq, that means a profound, all-consuming love. That is what I feel for you. Always yours, Khalid. Sarah read the letter 17 times. She pressed it to her chest and cried, great heaving sobs that came from the deepest part of her, the part that had been holding on to hope while her conscious mind insisted on cynicism and self-protection. She wrote him back immediately, a long letter in Arabic, pouring out everything she felt, every doubt and fear and overwhelming love. She told him about the bookstore she had been planning, how she had already scouted locations and researched renovation costs. She told him that she had been wrong to run, that fear had guided her instead of faith, and that she was done running. and then she waited. 2 months later, Khalid appeared at the hotel. Sarah was in the middle of her shift when she saw him walk through the lobby, and her heart nearly stopped. He looked different, thinner, more serious, but with a determined set to his jaw that suggested someone who had made a decision and would not be swayed. He asked for her by name, and her supervisor, noting the impeccable suit and the unmistakable air of power, immediately sent for her. When she emerged from the kitchen and saw him waiting in the dining room, Sarah had to grip the edge of a table to steady herself. Without a word, Khalid walked toward her, took her hand, and led her toward the exit. "I'm on shift," she protested weakly. "You're about to take a sudden and permanent leave," he said with absolute certainty. "Where are your things?" "In the employee locker room, but get them, we're leaving." "Khalid, I don't understand what's happening." "You will," he said. "But first you need to come with me. Trust me. Please." In a limousine waiting outside, Khalid finally took her hands and told her what had transpired during the 2 months of their separation. "I called off the engagement with Layla yesterday," he said. "Not in 4 months. Yesterday. I went to her family and I told them that I could not marry her, that it was unfair to her and to myself, and that I was prepared to forfeit the business contract and accept the consequences. Her father actually laughed. He said that Layla was relieved because she had been seeing someone else the entire time, and her family had already begun negotiations with another partner. Sarah's mind reeled. "Your father?" "My father is recovering well," Khalid said, and his smile was genuinely happy for the first time since she had known him. "And something extraordinary happened during his recovery. He had time to reflect on his life, his choices, his legacy. He realized that his obsession with building an empire had cost him the relationship with his son. He told me that he wanted me to be happy, truly happy, and that if that meant breaking tradition and marrying for love instead of profit, he would accept it." Khalid reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Sarah Mitchell, I'm asking you again, this time with the absolute certainty that there are no obstacles between us. I am asking you to marry me. I am asking you to open that bookstore with me. I am asking you to build a life with me, where we are honest, where we are brave, where we are completely and utterly ourselves." He opened the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring set in rose gold, with intricate Arabic designs etched into the band. "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Yes, yes, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and they kissed in the back of the limousine as the car pulled away from the curb, carrying them toward a future neither of them could have fully imagined 6 months earlier. The wedding took place 6 months later in a beautiful garden overlooking the Hudson River, designed to honor both of their heritages. Sarah wore a dress that blended traditional American elegance with subtle Arabic embroidery, while Khalid wore a tailored suit with a traditional thobe draped elegantly over his shoulders. The guest list included Khalid's family, his father walking him down the aisle with pride evident in every step, his mother weeping with joy, his aunts and cousins celebrating the union, and Sarah's modest circle, her few close friends, colleagues from the hotel who had become like family, and some distant relatives she had reconnected with through the planning process. The ceremony was conducted partially in English and partially in Arabic, with passages from both the Bible and the Quran woven together to create something that felt authentically theirs. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Khalid lifted Sarah's veil with tenderness, and the kiss they shared felt like a sealing of promises that went far beyond the legal document they had signed. The first months of marriage were a delicious discovery of building a life together. They had rented a brownstone in Brooklyn, a neighborhood that felt more manageable than the isolated luxury of Khalid's penthouse. Sarah used her knowledge of design and literature to transform the ground floor into Khalid and Sarah's Books, a community bookstore that would become her life's work. The space was warm and inviting, tall shelves filled with carefully curated selections of fiction and non-fiction, comfortable armchairs scattered throughout, a small cafe in the back corner serving coffee and tea from vendors they knew personally. On the walls, they displayed art from emerging local artists, creating a space that celebrated creativity in all its forms. Khalid was transformed by his marriage as well. He restructured his business to prioritize sustainable practices and ethical sourcing, implementing systems that his father had initially resisted but eventually came to respect. He reduced his own workload, shifting many responsibilities to a talented team of executives, freeing himself to be present in his marriage and to explore interests beyond profit margins. They adopted a rescue dog from a Brooklyn shelter, a spirited terrier mix they named Cairo, and spent their weekends exploring neighborhoods, finding hole-in-the-wall restaurants that served the best food, and simply being together without agenda or performance. But the path to complete happiness wasn't without its challenges. Khalid's mother, while supportive of the marriage, occasionally made comments about Sarah's different background, about the grandchildren she hoped would be raised with proper understanding of their Arabic heritage. Sarah's scattered family members, while welcoming of Khalid, sometimes seemed uncomfortable with the reality of her marriage to someone so wealthy and different from anyone they had known before. More significantly, there was the matter of cultural integration and identity. Sarah wanted to learn to cook traditional Arabic dishes from Khalid's mother, to deepen her understanding of his faith and heritage. But she was sometimes met with resistance, as if by learning these things too well, she was somehow overstepping boundaries or appropriating something that wasn't rightfully hers. One evening, after a particularly awkward family dinner where Khalid's cousin had made a comment about Sarah needing to assimilate properly, Sarah found herself crying in the kitchen of their brownstone. "I don't know how to be enough," she said to Khalid. "I'm not Arab enough for your family. I'm not American enough for them to feel like I've transcended my origins. I'm just in between, and it feels lonely." Khalid held her close. "You're not trying to be enough for them," he said gently. "You're trying to be enough for yourself. And you are. You always have been. The beauty of us, Sarah, is that we live in both worlds. We don't fully belong to either, which means we fully belong to something new that we are creating together. That's not a flaw. That's our strength." Over time, they created rituals that honored both of their backgrounds. They celebrated both Christmas and Eid. They spoke Arabic at home, but English in the bookstore. They cooked Lebanese food for family dinners, but also enjoyed Sarah's mother's Boston clam chowder recipe, which Sarah had finally learned from her father's old notes. Sarah learned to navigate Khalid's business world more confidently, attending events and dinners, gradually becoming a respected figure in her own right, not just as someone's wife, but as the owner of a beloved community institution. The bookstore became so popular that they had to expand, moving into the neighboring storefront and hiring staff to help manage the growth. 3 years into their marriage, the world changed suddenly. The global pandemic that swept across the planet in early 2020 brought everything to a halt. Lockdowns were imposed, and businesses deemed non-essential were forced to close. The bookstore, which had become the heart of their community, went dark. Sarah was devastated. She had poured her heart and soul into building that space, and the thought of not being able to welcome her customers, her friends, the regulars who came in every week, felt like a personal failure. But Khalid saw an opportunity. Within days, he had organized a system for curbside pickup and home delivery of books. He reached out to the authors and publishers they worked with and arranged author readings via video conference. He transformed the bookstore's Instagram account into a virtual gathering space, sharing recommendations and stories from their customers. More importantly, he realized that the pandemic would have significant economic consequences. His company was affected. Several of his suppliers shut down, and demand for his products fluctuated wildly. He worked 18-hour days, navigating supply chain issues and keeping his business afloat while supporting his employees through the uncertainty. The stress of the pandemic tested their marriage in ways they hadn't anticipated. Khalid was constantly working, often falling asleep at his desk. Sarah felt the weight of trying to keep the bookstore viable, of being a supportive wife, and of managing her own anxiety about what came next. There were nights when they barely spoke to each other, too exhausted and worried to do anything but collapse into bed. It came to a head one evening when Sarah found Khalid on the rooftop of their brownstone, staring out at the city. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual hum of Brooklyn life muted by the lockdown. "I'm failing," he said without preamble. "I'm failing my employees, my company, you, myself. I thought I had built something strong enough to withstand anything, and it's crumbling." Sarah sat beside him, and she took his hand. "You're not failing. You're surviving. We're both surviving something we never expected, something no one expected, and we're doing it together." "But I'm not present," he said. "I promised you that I would build a different kind of life, one where business didn't consume me, and I've broken that promise." "You haven't broken it," Sarah said firmly. "You've adapted it. The world is in crisis. Of course your attention is needed, but this is temporary, Khalid. When things stabilize, we'll recalibrate. We'll find our balance again." It was a moment of reckoning for them both, a moment where they had to decide whether the foundation they had built was strong enough to withstand true adversity. And they chose to hold on to each other, to communicate more openly about their fears and struggles, to ask for help when they needed it. The vaccine rollout began, and gradually the world reopened. The bookstore welcomed customers back, and while the pandemic had changed things, people were different, the community had shifted, it also had revealed what truly mattered. The regular customers who returned spoke of how much they had missed the space, how important it had been to their mental health during the crisis. Khalid's business emerged stronger than expected. His emphasis on ethical practices and employee welfare had created loyalty that sustained his company through the worst of the downturn. When the economy began to recover, he found himself in a position of significant power, but he didn't feel the same hunger for expansion that he once had. "I want to focus on the bookstore," he told Sarah one evening, about a year after the pandemic had begun to ease. "Or more accurately, I want to focus on us, on our life, on the community work we're doing. Would you be interested in opening more bookstores, creating a small chain that prioritizes community and culture over profit?" Sarah's eyes lit up. It was the vision she had always had for their bookstore, now expanded to include locations across New York City and eventually perhaps beyond. "Let's do it," she said, "together." The next 3 years were consumed with building their bookstore chain. What started as a single location in Brooklyn expanded to 5 locations across New York City, in Harlem, in Sunset Park, in Astoria, in the financial district, and back in their beloved original location. Each store had its own character, reflecting the community it served, but all carried the same philosophy: books and community above all else. Sarah became the public face of the enterprise. She gave interviews to book bloggers and literary magazines about how they were creating spaces that existed outside the normal publishing industry ecosystem. She worked directly with local authors, community organizations, and schools, creating programs that brought literature and learning to people who might not otherwise have access to these resources. Khalid managed the business side, but increasingly he found himself drawn to the cultural and community aspects of the work. He became passionate about supporting writers from underrepresented backgrounds, and he used his wealth to create a fellowship program that gave emerging authors the resources and time to write without financial pressure. One autumn afternoon, as they were working in their original bookstore, a woman approached Sarah at the counter. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said. She was probably in her 60s, well-dressed, with kind eyes. "Your store has meant more to me than I can express. I'm a retired teacher, and after my husband died, I felt very lost. But I came here, and I found community. I found people who understood the power of stories. You've given me a second life." Sarah was moved to tears by the woman's words, but what struck her most was the realization that this was why they had done all of this. Not for profit, not for accolades, but for moments exactly like this, when their work had genuinely improved someone's life. That evening she shared the interaction with Khalid, and he pulled her close. "Do you remember when I first asked you to come to Dubai?" he said. "I was running from my life, feeling hollow despite having everything. And you showed me that real wealth isn't measured in money or power. It's measured in meaningful connections and work that feeds your soul." "You saved me too," Sarah said. "I was stuck in a life of invisibility, just going through the motions. You taught me to be brave enough to take risks, to believe that I deserved love and beauty and purpose." "Oh, we saved each other," Khalid corrected gently. By the time they reached their 5th anniversary of marriage, Sarah and Khalid had built something that far exceeded what either of them had imagined when they first met in that penthouse suite. They had created jobs for dozens of people. They had helped hundreds of authors find publishing opportunities. They had built a community that spanned across the city and was beginning to expand nationally. But more importantly, they had built a marriage that worked, not because it was easy, but because they chose it actively every single day. They made time for each other despite the demands of their business. They maintained traditions, Saturday morning coffee at their favorite cafe, walks through the neighborhood where they had first lived as a married couple, quiet evenings at home, reading in comfortable silence, and they began to talk about family in a way they hadn't before. The question of children had been something they had discussed tentatively throughout their marriage, always with the understanding that it would happen when the time was right. By their 6th year together, both Sarah and Khalid felt that the foundation was solid enough to take on the responsibility and joy of parenthood. The process of trying to conceive and then discovering that Sarah was pregnant was its own emotional journey. There were months of waiting and hoping. There were moments of doubt. Would they be good parents? Would they have the patience required? Would bringing a child into their life complicate the marriage that had been built so carefully? But when Sarah held the positive pregnancy test, tears streaming down her face, Khalid held her and whispered promises of adventure, of learning together, of creating a child who would understand both of their worlds and could move fluidly between cultures in a way that they had both struggled with. Their son, Rashid James Mitchell al-Rashid, was born on a snowy December evening. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's caramel-colored skin and curious nature. From the moment he arrived, he became a bridge between their two worlds. His very existence, a tangible representation of their love and commitment to each other. Khalid took several months of parental leave from his company, a decision that shocked some of his business associates, but that felt completely natural to him. He wanted to be present for this moment, to change diapers and learn his son's preferences, to see Sarah navigate motherhood with the same grace and determination she brought to everything else in her life. Sarah had worried about how motherhood would impact her ability to work, but they had built a life flexible enough to accommodate it. She worked part-time at the original bookstore, often bringing Rashid with her in his small car seat, where the customers delighted in having a baby in the space. Khalid's employees were understanding about his need to attend to family matters. They had created something that worked because it was built on genuine values, not just efficiency. The extended family relationships deepened with the arrival of Rashid. Khalid's mother, who had sometimes seemed distant from Sarah, became obsessed with her grandson. She came to New York for extended visits and taught Sarah the proper way to prepare traditional dishes while telling stories about Khalid's childhood. Sarah's father, who had been skeptical about the whole relationship, became one of Rashid's most devoted grandparents, telling him stories and taking him on adventures around the city. What Sarah had not anticipated was how much becoming parents would strengthen her relationship with Khalid. The vulnerability of bringing a new life into the world together, the shared responsibility of caring for someone completely dependent on them, the conversations about values and what they wanted to teach their son, all of it deepened their bond in ways that even their romantic love couldn't quite reach. One night, after they had finally gotten Rashid to sleep, they sat on the roof of their brownstone, wrapped in blankets against the spring chill. "I was afraid," Khalid said, "that having a baby would change the dynamic between us, that I would love my son more than I love you." "And do you?" Sarah asked, not worried, just curious. "No," he said. "I love him ferociously, but it's a different kind of love. My love for you is the foundation. It's what makes everything else possible. It's the reason I want to be a good father, because I want to show him what a healthy, committed, honest partnership looks like." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "I wanted you to know that when I was pregnant, there was a moment when I was terrified. I thought about that night, when I found the emails about Marcus Davidson, and I worried that there might be other secrets, other things I didn't know about you." "Is there?" Khalid asked, his voice tense. "No," Sarah said firmly. "I realized that I had fully let go of that fear. I trust you completely, and I love you in a way that feels larger than anything I've ever felt." 7 years after that fateful encounter in the penthouse suite of the Grandeur Hotel, Sarah returned to the hotel for a special event. The hotel had commissioned a feature on community spaces that change lives, and they wanted to document the journey of how a chance conversation between a billionaire and a waitress had led to a thriving chain of community bookstores. Walking through the lobby, Sarah felt the weight of memory. She remembered being invisible here, remembered bringing tea to a man who would change everything, remembered the moment she decided to take a leap of faith. The interview took place in the penthouse suite where it had all begun. The photographer set up shots of Sarah looking out the window toward the Hudson River, of her standing in the space where Khalid had first asked her to come to Dubai, of her holding the photo of her and Khalid's wedding. The journalist asked her about the pivotal moments, the decisions that had seemed impossible at the time, but had led to a life beyond her imagination. "I think the key moment wasn't when I said yes to going to Dubai," Sarah said thoughtfully. "It was when I left, when I was brave enough to protect myself, to walk away from something that felt dangerous, even though I loved it. And then, when I was brave enough to return. The real courage wasn't in the yes. It was in being honest about my needs and limits. And then, in choosing to take a risk despite having valid reasons to be afraid." When the interview was over, Sarah received a call from Khalid. He had been waiting downstairs with Rashid, now a precocious 7-year-old who was extremely interested in the grand architecture and the history of where his parents had met. "How was it?" Khalid asked as she stepped out of the elevator. "Emotional," she said. "Healing, in a way. Seeing that space again, remembering how lost I felt, how brave you seemed, how terrifying it all was." Khalid pulled her close, with Rashid hanging onto his leg. "We should celebrate tonight," he said. "I have something I want to show you and Rashid." He took them to the location of what would be their 6th bookstore, a beautiful historic building in the Upper West Side, in a neighborhood that had long been underserved by independent bookstores. The space was currently being renovated, and Khalid had arranged for them to see it before the grand opening. "I want this one to be special," he told Sarah as they walked through the space. "I want it to be a living memorial to how we met, the penthouse to bookstore story. I want the top floor to have a small exhibit about the power of connection, of taking risks, of love transcending boundaries." Rashid was running around the empty space, imagining where books would go, asking questions about what stories they would stock. Watching her son, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. She had everything she had dreamed of and more: a partner who understood her, work that was meaningful, a son who represented the best parts of both of them, a community that they had built together. "I want to tell you something," Khalid said, pulling her aside while Rashid was exploring. "6 months ago, my father told me something. He said that when I was engaged to Layla, he knew it was wrong. He said he could see the resignation on my face, the acceptance of obligation over passion. He told me he broke his own heart when he insisted on the engagement, but he couldn't see another way forward without disappointing not just me, but his entire family structure." "What changed his mind?" Sarah asked. "Seeing me when you came into my life," Khalid said. "He said he saw something in my eyes that he hadn't seen before. Hope, genuine joy, the possibility of real happiness. He said that's when he began to rethink everything he believed about duty and obligation. He said you saved me, but you also saved him, because you reminded him that the point of building an empire is to create the conditions for happiness, not to sacrifice happiness in pursuit of the empire." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. "Your father said that." "He did. And he wanted to make sure you knew that he was grateful, that you changed our family, that you showed all of us that there was another way to live." The grand opening of the 6th bookstore was held on a spring evening, and it became the most significant event in the bookstore chain's history. Over 2,000 people came. Customers from all 5 existing locations, authors they had worked with, business partners, family and community members whose lives had been touched by the spaces they had created. Khalid and Sarah stood together at the center of the new store, looking out at the sea of faces. Rashid was perched on Khalid's shoulders, holding a small flag with their bookstore logo on it. When it came time for them to say a few words, Khalid stood at the microphone and began to speak. "7 years ago, I was a man with everything except what I actually needed: connection, purpose, and love. I was staying at a hotel, unable to communicate with the people around me, feeling profoundly alone in a sea of luxury. And then someone brought me tea, spoke to me in my language, and changed everything." He gestured towards Sarah. "This woman had every reason not to take a chance on me. I was wealthy, yes, but I was also emotionally unavailable, bound by family obligations, and living a life that had nothing to do with my actual values. She could have served me tea and forgotten I existed. Instead, she saw me, and when I asked her to take a risk, she did. Not because it was easy, it wasn't, but because she was brave." Sarah felt her heart swelling as she listened. "We built something together," Khalid continued, "not because we were just trying to build a life together. But in the process, we created these spaces, and we filled them with books and stories and community. We've helped launch authors' careers. We've given people sanctuary. We've created a business built on love and values instead of just profit. And I want to tell everyone here that it all started because one person, one beautiful, brave, ordinary person, was willing to take a chance on love." He stepped down from the podium and pulled Sarah into an embrace, and the crowd erupted in applause. Sarah's speech was shorter. She talked about what it felt like to be invisible, to go through life without seeing yourself reflected back. She talked about how meeting Khalid had forced her to confront her own worth, her own capacity for love and risk-taking. She talked about how the bookstores had become about more than books. They had become about creating visibility for everyone, about ensuring that no one had to feel the invisibility she had once known. I want to say something to anyone in this room who feels unseen, who feels trapped by circumstance, Sarah said, her voice wavering slightly with emotion. Your life can change. Not easily, not without difficulty and fear and challenges, but it can change. You're worthy of love that transcends boundaries. You're worthy of a partnership that meets you where you are. You're worthy of a life that feeds your soul instead of just your wallet. And it all begins when you decide to be brave. After the speeches, there was food and music and celebration. Sarah found herself in conversation with dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the bookstores. A young writer who had gotten her start in their author fellowship program. A widow who had found friendship and community after losing her husband. A teenager who had discovered his voice through their writing workshops. Late that night, after the celebration had ended and the store had been closed for the evening, Khalid and Sarah returned to the space with Rashid, now sleeping peacefully in his father's arms. They stood in the center of the store, surrounded by thousands of books, and Khalid looked at the exhibit that had been created to commemorate their story. There were photos of them from through the years, the wedding, the opening of the first bookstore, the birth of Rashid, moments of everyday life that had become extraordinary simply because they had lived them together. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to the penthouse that day? Khalid asked softly, careful not to wake Rashid. All the time, Sarah admitted. I would have continued serving tea. I would have built a modest life, probably. I might have eventually saved enough to open a small bookstore. I would have been okay, but I wouldn't have known what I was missing. I was walking toward a marriage that would have destroyed me slowly, Khalid said. I would have built a larger empire and felt emptier. I would have had money and status and absolutely nothing that mattered. We were both headed toward lives that were incomplete, Sarah said, and then we found each other. Khalid carefully laid their son on a nearby chair, and he pulled Sarah into his arms. I want you to know something, he said. Every single day I think about how lucky I am, not because of the money or the business success or any of that, but because you chose me. Not when it was convenient or easy, but when it required everything you had. You chose me when I was broken, and you helped me remember what it felt like to be whole. And you chose me when I was invisible, Sarah said. You saw me when no one else had. You made me believe I was worthy of love that wasn't transactional, that wasn't about serving someone, but about being truly seen. They kissed in the center of the bookstore, surrounded by stories of love and adventure and triumph. And in that moment, Sarah understood something fundamental. This was the real love story. Not the dramatic beginning, not the tears and separations and grand gestures. This was it. A quiet moment in their bookstore, their son sleeping nearby, the knowledge that they had chosen each other, chosen their life together, chosen this vision of what was possible when two people from different worlds decided that love was worth every risk, every tear, every moment of courage required to claim it. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. But in this space, in this moment, there was only the two of them, and the infinite possibility of a love that would sustain them for the rest of their lives. A love written across languages and cultures and centuries of tradition and broken expectations. A love that had begun with a simple question in a hotel penthouse and had blossomed into a life worth living, a legacy worth leaving, and a future that was finally, completely, and authentically their own.